Hello. I am a big fan of saying that with all the tools that are available, a pastor or somebody who wants to know New Testament Greek doesn't really have to do all the memorization that we used to do. We used to memorize, 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 memorize. And probably 90%, 95%, maybe 99% of the students had forgotten half the forms they memorized by the end of the summer. This is why they don't require Greek anymore in so many schools where people are preparing for ministry, because they couldn't memorize the forms. It's just a lot of work with a lot of not a very great return for most students. Well, we have the tools now. Interlinearbible.org will tell you what the forms are. If you have Logos software, if you have Accordance, they'll tell you what the forms are. And so, yeah, yay. However, I do think there are some basic things. You don't have to memorize all the permutations, but there are some basic forms that it would be good at least to learn once, and then you can remind yourself of them later. And of course, the more you're in the text, the more you'll see these over and over again. So I do want to, very briefly in this video, tell you some of the basic Greek indicative verb forms. Well, not just indicative, but some of the basic Greek forms. Okay, let's start with the present tense, a very good place to start. It's the form, okay, so the present tense is the form in the dictionary. And so when you learn a vocabulary word, or when you look up a Greek word, or you click on the Strong's G, click on, the vocabulary, you're going to get the present tense. The present tense is basically a basic stem plus an ending. Now, there are three, let's say three that are coming to mind, endings that it could have there. The most basic one is this omega ending, which if you've learned Greek at all, means I. So I loose. I am loosing, for example, would be a translation of luo. I loose, I destroy. Great. And so basically the present stem, okay, we think of a stem plus an ending. The present stem is the dictionary form stem. It's the basic word without the ending, okay? And so that lu is the present stem of the verb luo. Now you know the endings, right? So these are the active, and then in parentheses I have the kind of middle or passive endings. So we have songs, and I have videos with the songs on it. O ace a amen eta usi, o ace a amen eta usi. Those are the kind of active endings that are used with non-past tenses. So these are the endings that would be used, for example, in the future tense, because it's a non-past tense. Notice that I've taken the a in amen and the e in eta and the u in usi. I've taken that off because really those are connecting vowels. When you get to moods and you begin to talk about the indicative mood and so forth, those connecting vowels change in different moods. And so I've taken off the omicron and the epsilon and the u, so that you can see kind of more the raw ending. Now these are just messed up here. I just memorized them as they are. There's been a crash that's mangled, but men and te especially are the endings that are intact, and C is the ending with the possibility of a movable nu. Now, if you're in class with me, I've also had you memorize the middle or passive endings that are used in the present tense. Luomai, lue, luetai, luametha, luesthe, luantai, yai, 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 yai. Notice that I've songs by Rory Skelly, who I don't know where he's at now, but I've stolen your songs. So I've taken off the connecting vowels. O my, etai, ametha, estha, antai. Notice, here's the pattern. If the ending begins with a mu or a nu, then the connecting vowel is omicron. Everything else takes an epsilon, at least in this indicative mood. Okay? So, the present tense. Hopefully that was all review. The imperfect tense. Now, the imperfect tense, we've told you, is past continuous action. But what does it look like? Well, believe it or not, the imperfect tense is built off of this same basic present stem chassis. Now, from an English perspective, you'll think, well, that makes no sense at all. The imperfect tense is past time. Why would it be built on the same basic chassis as the present tense, which is present time? And here's where I remind you that in Greek, tense is not primarily about time. In Greek, tense is primarily about what? Kind of action. And both the present tense and the imperfect tense primarily connote continuous, ongoing action. And so from that standpoint, it makes perfect sense that the imperfect tense would be built off that same basic stem as the imperfect and the present would be built on the same basic stem. So how do you know it's imperfect? Well, it's going to add something called an augment on the front of the word. So you're going to take that lu and you're going to put a little epsilon in front of it. And that's going to make it imperfect. Now, if the first letter of the stem, so lambda is nice, it's a consonant. But let's say that the beginning of the word was a vowel. Then the way it would augment is by lengthening. So if it begins with an alpha, it'll lengthen to an eta. If it begins with an epsilon, it'll lengthen to an eta. If it begins with an omicron, it'll lengthen to omega. You may remember in some of the trek that we've done that there have been some forms where, man, that doesn't look anything like the dictionary form. And you kind of trust the Strong's number in interlinearbible.org that it's taking you to the right word. But it's funny because the vocabulary form that you clicked on, the Strong's number, begins with a completely different letter than the form in the interlinear. Well, this is one of the main reasons why. Because sometimes if a word is, say, in the imperfect tense, frankly, this works for all past tenses in the indicative mood. In the indicative mood, if you make something past tense, it's going to augment the front. The augment, in my opinion, indicates past time. So the augment does mean time, because you don't get augments in other places in Greek. It's when it's talking about past time that you get that augment. So the imperfect tense is going to take the present stem and it's going to put an epsilon on the front if the word begins with a consonant. And if the word begins with a vowel, it's going to lengthen it to one of these two letters. Okay, so imperfect tense is the present stem with an augment. Now, the imperfect tense puts on a different set of endings. And eventually I'll want you to memorize these, and I have songs for them. So you have the endings that you've memorized. O, a, say, amaneta, usi, luamai, lue, luatai. Those are non-past tense endings. There is a second set of endings. It's the last set of endings you'll ever need. There's another set of endings, that's not true, but there's another set of endings that are for past tenses. And let me just show you them for now. Eventually we'll want to memorize them. So these are the actives, and these are the middle or passives. So the song for the active past tense endings are to the tune of, if you're saved and you know it, say amen. On esse, amen, etta, on orison. On esse, amen, etta, on orison. On esse, amen, etta, on esse, amen, etta, on esse, amen, etta, on orison. Okay, so those are the past tense active endings. And then for the past tense middle or passive endings, we have to the tune of kumbaya. Amen, u, eta, ametha. Amen, u, eta, ametha. Amen, u, eta, ametha. Esther, anta. Those are the four basic sets of endings. And so the imperfect tense is going to take the present stem, it's going to put an epsilon on the front, or lengthen if it begins with a vowel, and then it's going to put on this set of endings depending on the person and number, or whether it's active or middle or passive. That's how you recognize an imperfect tense. How do you recognize a future tense? Why, I've already told you. The future tense adds a sigma. It's fairly easy to recognize. And of course, now here, the future passive is weird. I'm sorry. The future passive is going to take that lu and add a theta eta sigma to it, and then it's going to add one of these sets of endings to the end. Why does it do this? I don't know. We need to go back and fix these Greek people. But you can see that it still adds a sigma, but it adds a theta eta sigma. And we're going to see that theta eta again, unfortunately. So again, I'm sorry. I didn't invent this language. But it's kind of neat when you know it. What about the aorist tense? Well, the aorist tense is going to take that lu and it's going to add a sigma alpha to the end. Not just a sigma is future, but a sigma alpha is going to make it aorist. There are all kinds of exceptions to what I'm saying, but just stick with what I'm saying for the moment. Adds a sigma alpha to the stem, and then it augments the front in the indicative. Okay, I should have just told you this and then later told you I was lying as I add on things. But the thing to know is that the aorist adds a sigma to the end of the stem and augments the front. The aorist passive is weird. It's crazy. Aorist passive adds a theta eta. Notice the relationship between the aorist passive and the future passive. The future passive adds a theta eta sigma, and the aorist passive adds a theta eta. And an ending after that. So it seems to me that this theta eta is an indication of passiveness. That's something you should take away. Theta eta passive. If it's theta eta sigma, it's future passive. If it's just theta eta, then it's aorist passive. Perfect tense. Hey, we're already to the end of the tenses. So the perfect tense does something funny. It reduplicates the front. It's going to take that stem lu, and it's going to put the lambda beside itself, gets a little beside itself, and then it puts an epsilon in the middle. So lu becomes lelu, or mu would become memu, or me would become meme, or to would become teto. So it gets a little beside itself and puts an epsilon in the middle. I'll show you a picture of this in a second. Now, if the first letter of a verb you're reduplicating begins with a vowel, it's going to do the same thing that you did with augmenting. You reduplicate a word that begins with a vowel by lengthening the vowel, and that's the perfect tense indicator, reduplication on the front. Now, if it's perfect active, it's not only going to reduplicate the front, but it's going to add a kappa alpha on the end. And again, I'm going to show you this in a second. If it's perfect Miller passive, it shoves the ending right onto the stem. And sometimes you get a crash because there's no cartilage there. It's arthritic, bone against bone. It's going to be messy. Okay, so those are the basic rules. Now let me show you a way to remember what I've just said. So basically, you can take all of these forms for any Greek verb and boil them down to no more than 6 basic chassis, 6 basic principal parts. It's like if GM, General Motors, you have Chevrolets, you have Cadillacs, you have Pontiacs, used to have Oldsmobile. If you took all of General Motors cars and you said, we can identify any of our cars by 6 basic chassis. We put different stuff on the car. You can have a sunroof or a spoiler or special mag tires. You can do all kinds of variations, but all of our cars reduced to 6 basic chassis. Well, that's the way it is with Greek verbs. Greek verbs reduce to 6 basic forms. And if you know the 6 forms of any verb, you can recognize any form of that verb, including the irregular ones, the ones you just have to memorize. If you know, and some verbs don't have all 6 forms, but there are 6 principal parts that you can recognize any form of a verb by. Again, if all of this seems unclear, let me now become concrete. So the first 3 principal parts are the present stem, the adasigma future stem, and then the aorist stem. So these are the first 3 basic chassis that a Greek verb could have. Present stem does nothing to the stem. The future stem adds a sigma to the stem. The aorist stem adds an augment to the front and puts a sigma alpha on the end. So these are the first 3 of the chassis, the first 3 principal parts. And I have a song to remember these 6 principal parts of Luo. And if you learn this song, then you're going to learn how to recognize each tense. So the first 3, the first part of the song to the tune of Praise Him, all ye little children, Luo, Luso, Elusa, and the song will continue on the next slide. Luo, Luso, Elusa. Okay, that's the beginning of the song. So the first principal part is the present stem, tells you how to recognize the present tense. The second principal part tells you how to recognize the future active and middle, because remember the future passive does something with a theta eta. We'll see that in a second. Then the aorist active and middle has the sigma alpha and an augment. Okay? So nothing added to the present stem. The future adds a sigma. The aorist adds an augment and a sigma alpha. Okay? So if you know these first three principal parts, then you know how to recognize the present, the future, and the aorist, at least in their active and middle forms. Like I said earlier, the imperfect is built off of this first stem. It takes the basic present stem and adds an augment and past tense endings, and you've made it imperfect. Okay? What are the next three principal parts? Well, the next three principal parts are these perfect forms, and then the aorist passive form we've told you about. So the whole song goes like this. Luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane. Luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane. Those are the 6 principal parts of luo. There will be a quiz over them to be able to reproduce those 6 forms and to be able to translate, give a basic translation for each of them. So for these 3, this is I am loosing. This one is I will loose. This one is I loosed, past tense. This one is I have loosed. This one is I have been loosed. And this one is I was loosed. Now, I got a little ahead of myself. What are these? So this is the perfect active. As I said in the previous slide, the perfect active reduplicates itself. Both of the perfects reduplicate themselves. So the first letter gets a little beside itself, and it puts an epsilon in the middle. First letter gets a little beside itself and put an epsilon in the middle. So these are perfect forms. The perfect active not only reduplicates, but adds a kappa alpha to the end of the stem. The perfect middle or passive shoves the ending right onto the stem. I can always tell, I don't even have to look at the first part of a word if I see that the ending has been shoved right onto the stem with no connecting vowel. Normally there would be an oh my in there. The fact that there isn't suggests that this is perfect middle or passive. Just by looking at these 2 letters, I know this is perfect middle or passive without looking at the front because the ending has been shoved right on the stem. And this will get mangled. You'll see kind of crazy stuff in here as the ending and the end of the stem crash into each other and do all kinds of phonetic tricks. So that's the perfect middle or passive. The aorist passive, again, takes the basic stem. It adds an augment when it's aorist in the indicative, and then theta eta to the end, and then an ending. So that this is the way the aorist passive is built. Don't ask me why the aorist passive does something so completely different from the active form, but it just does, and we have to deal with it. So the perfect active reduplicates, the perfect middle or passive reduplicates, the aorist passive augments, then the perfect active reduplicates and adds a kappa alpha. The perfect middle or passive reduplicates, shoves the ending right on the stem. The aorist passive augments and adds a theta eta to the end and then an ending. Okay? Finally, the past perfect is built on these, but I won't tell you how to do it because that's not important right now. Future passive adds a sigma to the theta eta. And that's, so if you review this over and over again, eventually it'll make sense to you. So there will be a quiz on this eventually. There will be a quiz where I ask you to give me the 6 principal parts of luo. Luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane, and to give me a translation of them. Present tense, I am loosing. Future tense, I will loose. Aorist, I loosed. Perfect active, I have loosed. Perfect passive, I have been loosed. Aorist passive, I was loosed. And then I'm going to want you to be able to fill in the blank in keeping with what I've just said previously, and that is this. The present adds what to the basic stem? Nothing. It adds nothing. Nada, zilch. The present stem is the basic stem. Okay, trick question. It does have endings, but it doesn't add anything to the stem. Stem, think of the stem has the flower on the top. The flower is the ending. the stem is what the flower is on, or to the train. The stem is the main car, and the ending is the caboose. So the imperfect adds what to the front of the present stem? An augment is what the imperfect adds to the front of the present stem. What does the future add to the end of the basic stem? It adds a sigma to the end of the basic stem. What does the aorist add to the front of the basic stem? An augment, just like the imperfect. The imperfect and the aorist, when they're in the indicative mood, add an augment to the front. And that adds what to the end? A sigma alpha, and then the ending. Okay, can you do this? You can. Okay, the perfect what's the front of the basic stem? It reduplicates the front of the basic stem. In the active, what does it add to the end of the basic stem? A kappa alpha. Okay? What does the perfect Miller passive do at the end? It shoves the ending right onto the stem. Okay? The aorist passive adds what? A theta eta to the stem. Okay? And finally, the future passive adds a sigma, because it's future, to the theta eta of the aorist passive. And finally, you augment and reduplicate a verb that begins with a vowel by lengthening. And if you know those things, you will get 100% on a future quiz coming to a university near you. So here we have the basic verb forms. Watch this over and over again, and then when you're looking in the New Testament, you'll begin to see these things. And before you know it, you won't be able to unsee them. They'll just jump out at you. So this has been Basic Greek Forms.